Back in 2010, Square Enix released Final Fantasy XIV to the public after a troubled development period, and it is safe to say that the game didn't set the world on fire. The 1.0 release of the game was universally panned by the gaming media and heavily criticised by its players as a grindy experience with very little to do. This was a game that damaged Square Enix's reputation enough that the CEO, Yoichi Wada, had to apologise for the state of the game, reshuffling the development team and leading to the entire game to be remade from the ground up. Now, nearly 10 years after that initial disastrous release, and with its third expansion Shadowbringers due out later this year, Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn is one of the premier MMO experiences on the market, and has become a success for Square Enix. What is it about this current version of the game that caused this massive turnaround of player opinion? Well, let me tell you. This is Ben, and here are 5 reasons to play Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. This might seem like a silly point to make, but it's true. Despite being a mainline title, Final Fantasy XIV can often be underestimated as a Final Fantasy game. Because of its nature as an MMO, it can be disregarded by fans of the series that are only used to single player experiences. But this is a grave mistake, as Final Fantasy XIV shares all the hallmarks and familiar elements that make a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game, including a story to rival other mainline titles. You play as a warrior of light, the chosen hero of Hydaelyn, and an adventurer in the 7th Umbral Age of Eorzea. Set 5 years after the cataclysmic events that brought the original version of Final Fantasy XIV to an end, the story begins with you as a fledgling adventurer in one of the 3 main city-states of Eorzea, those being Gridania, Lemsa-Lominsa and Ul'dah, and you quickly develop the reputation as a hero of the realm. In possession of the power of the Echo, which allows the hero to glimpse the past of people they encounter, as well as provide protection from the brainwashing abilities of the Primals, the warrior is scouted by the Scions of the 7th Dawn to eliminate the Primal threat. The Primals, based on summons from other games such as Garuda and Ifrit, can be summoned by Eorzea's beast tribes in special rituals and have the potential to do significant damage to the world. And to make things more complicated, as the story continues, the warrior and the world at large also have to deal with the threat of the technologically advanced Garlean Empire, and all the while a shadowy organisation known as the Ascians manipulate events behind the scenes. Like any good Final Fantasy story, you'll meet a cast of colourful characters, clash with intimidating villains, travel the length and breadth of a new world and experience happiness, amusement, tragedy and death through the many hours it will take you to reach the conclusion of the story, albeit one that seems far from being complete. But the story is just a start. One of the reasons Final Fantasy XIV managed to hook me in when I first started, and to keep me coming back, was the sheer amount of references and recognisable elements I encountered throughout my journey. Many of the game's classes are based on the iconic jobs in previous games, such as the Dragoon or the White Mage, and a number of the enemies you encounter include iconic enemies such as Cactuars, Morbles and Tomberries. Even several of the bosses you can encounter will be familiar, with new versions of Titan, Shiva and Ifrit counted among their number. The cute pom-headed Moogles make several appearances in the game, with a village of them in the Heavensward expansion and a fight against the King of the Moogles occurring as part of the story. You can use Chocobos to travel between the game's various towns and outposts, eventually earning your own rideable Chocobo from one of the in-game factions. Gil is still the main currency in the game, and of course there is a character named Sid. While it would be enough to just have all these elements, where Final Fantasy XIV becomes incredibly special for me is how much of a love letter the game is to the entire franchise, and as a long-time fan I've lost count of the number of times I've experienced sheer joy at the references or allusions to the past. One of my fondest memories when I was playing the game several years ago was getting to fight against a version of Gilgamesh, who first appeared in Final Fantasy V, while a brand new remixed version of Battle of the Big Bridge played throughout the fight. It made me so nostalgic for those early games and was a fight I would replay constantly just because it felt so epic. These days, you can find that feeling in so much of the content available. You can travel to the land of Ivalice from Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy Tactics as part of the 24-person Alliance raid that was introduced as part of the Stormblood expansion. During this raid, you'll encounter several familiar characters and boss fights from those games, and even see locations like the Garum Seek Waterway. One of my current favourites is the Omegascape raid fight, in which you encounter several of the bosses from Final Fantasy VI, such as the Demon Train and one of the greatest villains in Final Fantasy history in the form of Kefka, complete with Dancing Man playing in the background. And this is just a small taste of the kind of references and fan service you can find in this game, but I'll let you discover the rest on your own. When you first create a character in Final Fantasy XIV, you were given a selection of 8 classes to start with. These classes are divided into Disciples of War and Disciples of Magic, with each also falling into a role category of either a tank, a healer or a DPS, which is then further divided into range, magic or melee DPS. Your class selection determines your starting skills, fighting style and the city that you start in. So far, this is pretty standard for an MMO, but upon hitting level 30 and completing a special quest for your class, it'll upgrade to a more advanced version of itself that is called a job. It is a job system in Final Fantasy XIV that gives it something unique from the standard class system in many MMO. Upon advancing to your class's designated job, you gain new skills and abilities to supplement the ones you already gained from your class. Many of these new abilities add new mechanics to make each job more complex, with each job also getting a unique UI gauge that lets you keep track of some of those new mechanics, such as the Red Mage's balance gauge that keeps track of their black and white mana usage. In addition to the mechanical advances, each job also gains a bunch of new lore and flavour compared to the initial class. The bow-wielding archer becomes a musically inclined bard, the spear-wielding lancer becomes a sky-conquering dragoon, and the humble gladiator becomes a holy paladin. The main exception to this is the Arcanist, which is the option of becoming either the DPS-based summoner or the healing-based conjurer. In addition to the jobs you can start with, several of the options available are locked behind a level restriction, with the exception of the rogue, which unlocks at level 10 and can advance to become a ninja, and the blue mage, which is considered a limited job due to its unique mechanics. Most of these additional classes are unlocked with the expansion packs that have been added to the game. With these classes, which count among their number the aforementioned Red Mage and the Astrologian, there is a grand total of 16 possible jobs, a number which is set to expand once again with the addition of the Gunbreaker and the Dancer when Shadowbringers launches over the summer. With so much variety and so many options, how do you decide which job is the best one for you? Well, that is the best bit. You don't have to. This is a Final Fantasy game after all. Taking inspiration from some of its single-player cousins like Final Fantasy IV, your character isn't forced to stick with just the one job. Provided you have reached the city the class is based in, reached the level requirement where necessary, and then completed an initial quest to unlock it, you can play as every single job the game has to offer you, with each job levelling independently. This is one of my favourite aspects of Final Fantasy XIV, as it gives you the freedom to choose what you want to be, how you want to play, and most importantly which role you wish to fill during instance dungeons, without being locked out of anything. And all of this doesn't take into consideration the 3 gathering jobs and the 8 crafting jobs that also fall into this system, giving you an even greater variety on how you can choose to play this game. Mechanically, Final Fantasy XIV falls into the hotkey MMO format that was popularised by World of Warcraft, and that has become the standard for the genre. But calling Final Fantasy XIV's combat a carbon copy of WoW would be doing the game a great disservice, as it has many of its own merits. All of the action abilities in the game are split into 3 categories, those being weapon skills, abilities and spells. Weapon skills are attacks of an equipped weapon and are typically used instantly. Spells are magically inclined actions that typically have a cast time, and abilities are actions that vary wildly in terms of how they are used and what they do. Both weapon skills and spells are attached to a global cooldown, while abilities are actions that are off the global cooldown. While there are some exceptions to these rules, these are the basic building blocks for combat in Final Fantasy XIV, especially when you bring in the more unique aspects of the game's many jobs. Each of the jobs in the game generally has a rotation of abilities that are most effective, and this normally involves weaving actions that are off the global cooldown between the actions that are. For example, with a Red Mage, you typically alternate between casting black and white magic spells to build up your mana meter in order to allow a weapon skill combo, or while using actions such as Flechette and Accelerate to do damage or improve your rotation. The complexity ramps up even further when you jump into dungeons and raids and have to consider the job's role. With a tank, you need to build up enmity in order to keep your enemies attacking you and not the rest of the party. As a DPS, you need to kill things as quickly as possible, and as a healer, you need to keep everybody else alive. And you have to do all of this while avoiding the telegraphed attacks of the enemies that you encounter, all communicated through a language of markers that you learn as you continue to play the game. Where the combat begins to ramp up and become something very special are the various boss fights you encounter throughout your time with the game. This is especially true of the 8 and 24 person content, a lot of which is centred solely around the fighting of these bosses. During many of these fights, there are AoE markers littered everywhere that you must avoid, unique mechanics to learn and several phases to vanquish. All of the best combat encounters in the game become this magnificent and chaotic dance as all the facets of the combat system come together, and as you fight more and more of these epic battles, you'll notice a continual improvement in your skills until you reach a level of perfection that is incredibly satisfying. At the time of writing this, I'm approaching 600 hours of total playtime, and yet I feel that there is so much more for me to discover. Final Fantasy XIV is so densely packed with things to do that it is very difficult to get bored. While the main story quest is clearly the main attraction for a new player, with the dungeons and trials you unlock as you progress through it being a nice change of pace from time to time, it is also a very lengthy experience. And as a result, you may find the need to take a break from it from time to time. So what else can you do? Why not start with a myriad of side quests that each zone contains, many of which are part of their own short story chains? Want a total change of pace? How about picking up a gathering job like the Miner or the Lumberjack to collect the hundreds of resources a game has to acquire? How about making use of all those materials from picking up a crafting job like a blacksmith or an alchemist, and create equipment and items for your own use, or even just to sell on the market board for some gil? Want to relax and take a load off? How about a trip to the Gold Saucer? Much like its namesake from Final Fantasy VII, the Gold Saucer is a gloriously gaudy theme park that is full of distractions from your main quest. Activities available to waste your time on include arcade machines, a weekly lottery, scratch cards, mahjong, and a Dota-inspired RTS game. You can choose to participate in one of the gates, a randomly selected minigame that's available every 20 minutes, which range from events such as a jumping puzzle to a rail shooter. There are even full-blown versions of Chocobo Racing and Triple Triad from Final Fantasy VII and VIII respectively. You could also choose to head out into the game's varied zones just to take a look at the gorgeous environments, do a little bit of sightseeing, finding yet more jumping puzzles or completing your hunting log. You could go out and meet the various beast tribes, do quests for them to increase your reputation and unlock exclusive rewards. You could even jump into a little bit of PvP. And all of this barely scratches the surface of what this game can offer you. I've not even mentioned things like relic weapons, squadrons, treasure maps, Eureka, and many other potential pursuits available. And all of this content comes with its own rewards that can range from simple things like achievements, to high-powered gear, to more cosmetic items such as mounts and emotes, with a full-blown glamour system available to customise your look in any way that you choose. So, if you are a kind of player that wants to experience everything a game has to offer, you'll certainly be getting your money's worth here. So there we have it, 5 reasons to play Final Fantasy XIV. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe below, I would really appreciate it. This is Ben, signing off.